Hi, everybody. My name is Zach Ford. I am the chair of the Dusty Baker-Sacramento SABR chapter. I'm excited that everybody was able to join us this evening. We have a great meeting planned with one of my favorite topics, Lefty O'Doul, San Francisco Seals. Been a passion of mine for probably 30 years. So looking forward to hearing more. But I do have a few announcements. First off, if you have not renewed or joined SABR, please do that. We need to make sure to maintain our chapter membership. Also, the convention is coming up in just about a month and a half, July 5th through 9th in Chicago. You're still able to register if you're able to make it out to Chicago. It's a great event. Fortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it this year, but definitely next. While some of the folks are in Chicago, we're going to do a small gathering to a Giants game. I still have a few tickets left for that Friday, July 7th. So if you are interested, please reply to the email I sent out to our chapter members. Another thing, Little Fenway West, which is going to be the location of our next meeting on Saturday, June 10th. Coming up pretty soon. It is a 25% replica wiffle ball field of Fenway Park. We're going to be able to play out there and have some fun. We'll have a little bit of barbecue type lunch. And then also the member that is letting us use that location also has a baseball memorabilia museum on that property as well, with a lot of cool stuff. So we're looking forward to that. And then I've kept quiet about this for a long time, even though most of you know that I have been working on a book project called Called Up, which is going to be a collection of 109 first-person player stories about those players getting called up to the big leagues and their major league debuts. So I'm going to go ahead. It just came out on pre-order. I'm going to go ahead and drop that in there. I'm going to do a little shameless plug. That's my first shameless plug of, I'm sure, many coming up. But don't pre-order it now, though. Just click on the link to where it comes up in a tab. And then for the next hour or so, focus on this great update on this Lefty O'Doul film. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Marlene, who has a few additional announcements before she announces John, and then we get the ball rolling for the Lefty O'Doul film update.
Thank you, Zach, and congratulations. We're all looking forward to Called Up and hearing you talk more about it. The bits and pieces we've seen over time are very intriguing. So I'm Marlene Vogelsang, and with Steve Treader, who's there with us from Tucson. We're the co-chairs of the Lefty O'Doul chapter, and we are delighted to see all of you today and to continue this partnership with the Dusty Bakers with very frequent Zoom meetings. I also want to remind you that the Jerry Malloy Negro Leagues Conference is coming up in Detroit from July 20th to 23rd. And the Women in Baseball Conference, which is a joint presentation from SABR and the International Women's Baseball Center, IWBC, will be a hybrid event in September, at the end of September in Rockford and online. Most of it will be online. Locally with Zach, Zoom, we're looking at inviting Dave Newhouse and Andy Dolich, who have written a very timely book called Goodbye Oakland. We weren't going to talk about Oakland anymore tonight. But anyway, it talks about the three sports clubs, the sports teams leaving Oakland. I'm also hoping to have a meeting with James Stapleton, who's the captain of the San Francisco Pelicans of the Bay Area Vintage Baseball League, join us for a meeting, and then plan a meetup at a local vintage baseball game. That leads me to welcome Jacob Pomrenke, who is here on the call. You all know Jacob from SABR, but he's on the Berkeley team of the Bay Area Vintage Baseball League. And also want to welcome Bob Rousson from the Pacific Northwest chapter. Glad you're here. And Brianna and Erica, this is just a shout out to you and Pat and all you guys. I'm so glad to see you. I'd like to welcome our three guests. Want to our longtime favorite guest is Jon Leonoudakis, who's going to lead the presentation tonight about the Lefty O'Doul film documentary project. And with him is Tom O'Doul, Lefty's cousin Tom, and Dennis Snelling, who wrote the recent and wonderful biography of Lefty. Let me tell you a little bit more about Jon, if you just refresh your memory about all the wonderful things he's done. Jon is a baseball historian and award-winning documentary filmmaker. In 2016, he created The Sweet Spot, the first streaming series to tell the stories beyond the stats, taking viewers on a unique journey deep inside the heart and soul of baseball. The series dug deep beneath the veneer of hot dogs and apple pie to explore the human side of the game, as well as social issues of race and gender through the lens of baseball. Hopefully you all have seen some of those clips. Jon has 10 films in the Baseball Hall of Fame's permanent collection and has been a speaker at the 9 Spring Training Baseball Conference, New York's Virginia Baseball Clubhouse, and the Cooperstown Symposium. He also lectured about baseball at University of San Francisco, Union College of New York, and at the Baseball Reliquary. Jon's last film, and we had a meeting on this a short time ago, Ball 4 Turns 40, can be streamed for free on Tubi.com, and his films about Arnold Haino, 1989 World Series earthquake, and Shutout, the battle American women waged to play baseball, are on Amazon Prime. So he's currently at work on his 30th. That's a nice round number, Jon. His 30th baseball documentary, Lefty O'Doul, Baseball's Forgotten Hero. So, you know, we're especially glad to welcome you to the Lefty O'Doul chapter tonight to tell us how this project is going. And we're going to turn it over to you and Dennis and Tom. Thanks again.
I'm going to share my screen. We'll get started here. All right. Hopefully you can all see that. For some reason, I can't hear everyone. Can you hear me and see me, Marlene?
I can see you and I can hear you. Everybody else?
Great. All right. Well, good. If you can see me, I'm sure everybody else can. Well, thank you again for inviting me to share about the Lefty O'Doul documentary project. I would like to acknowledge both Tom O'Doul and author Dennis Snelling for all the help and support that they're giving me. I'm a member of SABR, the Baseball Reliquary in the Hall of Fame. I'm also a native San Franciscan and left-handed, just like Lefty O'Doul. So this Jackie Robinson quote, "A life is not important except on the impact it has on other lives," really boils down the essence of the story of Lefty O'Doul's life, as I'll demonstrate shortly. Francis Joseph Lefty O'Doul, 1897 to 1969, was a man of many hats. Native San Franciscan, one of the greatest hitters in baseball history, baseball ambassador, Pacific Coast League manager, hitting instructor, restaurateur, and a humanitarian. He packed 3 lifetimes of adventures and achievements into 72 years. I got reintroduced to Lefty in 2013 when he was inducted into the People's Hall of Fame, also known as the Baseball Reliquary. I've been a reliquarian since 2002 and rarely miss their Shrine of the Eternals induction ceremonies. His incredible story piqued my interest. 4th best lifetime batting average of 349, along with his pioneering influence developing Japanese baseball and their professional baseball program from the 1930s through the 60s until his passing in 1969. I began this project in the summer of 2016 when I was shooting interviews and collecting oral histories for my Sweet Spot multimedia project. I met with Tom O'Doul at the iconic Lefty O'Doul's restaurant in Hofbrau on Geary Street on Union Square in San Francisco. 7 months later, the venerated baseball sanctuary was whisked to the sands of time due to a landlord dispute, but we were able to capture the wondrous interior of this baseball palace thanks to a guided tour by Tom O'Doul, and that footage will most likely be included in the film we're making about Lefty. Now, 5 years ago, I was one of the producers of a very successful music documentary called The Wrecking Crew, and the heart of that film's story was shining a light on people who were unheralded and in danger of being overlooked. Audiences love an underdog story or tales about people who never got their due. I definitely put Lefty in that category. Now, the Pixar film Coco has a beautiful message that those who have died are never really gone as long as people keep talking about them. That's one of the important goals for Lefty's film. He's also been gone so long that some think he's a fictional character along the lines of a Betty Crocker. He never received enough votes for induction or was recognized with the Buck O'Neill Award as baseball ambassador, and he's in danger of being forgotten in the 21st century. Now, once COVID shutdown hit in 2020, I got back on the bus and decided to do something I'd never done before, which was to make a trailer for a film before it was made to generate interest in the project. Let me show that to you now. See if we can get this to come up on screen. There we go. I trust you're all seeing this, so I'll just go ahead.
Is there sound to it, John?
Yeah.
I love to play. When I was playing ball in the big league, my bats were jumping in the club.
All right, so there is our Lefty trailer. It's had a lot of views over the past 3 years, so we're pretty happy about that. Let me make sure I've got my other one queued up here for our next piece. There we go. Okay, great. Let me get back onto my keynote here. Give me just 1 second. All righty. So 3 years later, the film is in production with a great head of steam out of the gate. I'll be sharing a 9-minute cut of the film's first promotional teaser tonight, a world premiere of sorts, and very apropos, doing it for the Lefty O'Doul chapter. The film, I've come to discover, and Lefty's story, as far as I'm concerned, is not necessarily about baseball, but how a kid with an 8th grade education from very modest means not only became one of the greatest hitters in the history of the game, but a humanitarian who touched the lives of millions of people and helped build peace and build a bridge between bitter enemies. So why make this film? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's a great human story that hasn't been told before on film. It's about making an effort to connect with others, harvesting friendships, and helping people. That's an important evergreen message to share with the world. The goal is to paint a dimensional portrait of someone who's been gone for over 50 years. And one of the biggest challenges as the film's director is to create a film where Lefty feels present and relatable in the 21st century and beyond. And maybe, just maybe, the film helps Lefty get a well-deserved seat at the Hall of Fame's table. So, how to paint this dimensional portrait? My plan is to use a variety of techniques to take the film beyond the realm of talking heads, old photographs, and scratchy black and white film. Plan on using animation to portray key moments of Lefty's life that were not recorded by still or film cameras. Lefty himself will play a strong role using real quotes from the man, voiced by an actor as Lefty. His voice will be weaved through the film as a narrative thread. His love affair with Japan is really important. Lefty's first trip to Japan was in 1931 as part of a US tour, and he fell in love with the country, the culture, and the people. He enjoyed teaching the game to the Japanese, who he felt were more open to learning and less resistant than American players. He was inducted into the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame in 2002. And not long before he died, Lefty said, "I've got more friends in Japan than I do here in the United States." So some of you, I'm sure many of you here have read Lawrence Ritter's wonderful book, The Classic Oral History, The Glory of Their Times. And he has an interview with Lefty O'Doul. And if you've not heard the audiobook, I highly recommend it, because those are the original recordings that Ritter did with all of these old ball players. So he's got an interview with Lefty, and especially if you hear him on the audio version, it doesn't really seem to square with the happy, friendly soul who was so popular in San Francisco. He was where he was referred to as the male of Powell Street. In the interview, his tone is somewhat bitter and resentful of contemporary players. I believe that interview was done in 1963, and he was kind of on the downside of his baseball career and kind of fading into the background. He'd been, he's no longer managing in the PCL. He no longer had the ceremonial position as hitting instructor for the Giants. And he was really kind of relegated to a relic of the past. And I think it really hurt Lefty. So I think that particular interview is not really reflective of the man himself. In any case, so here's where we are with the project currently. The first phase of production is nearly complete. And that scope of work included the most critical interviews for the film's narrative. Tom O'Doul, Dennis Snelling, baseball historian Rob Fitz, author historian Kari Yo Nakagawa, and Tadeo Konishi, who grew up in Japan and attended 2 games of Lefty's 1949 Goodwill Tour of Japan. I'm in the process of creating teaser trailers to increase the profile of the project and to generate crowdfunding for the next phase of the project. Other key interviews on the wish list include Bob Costas, Saruharu Oh, Ichiro, and Akihito, the former emperor of Japan, who met Lefty at age 16 during the 1949 tour, which was supposedly the very first baseball game Akihito had attended. So our official website is now up. You can visit it. It's leftyodouldoc.com. It is home plate for all things related to the Lefty documentary. Now, the more I dug deeper into Lefty's story, the more I realized this was not really a story about baseball, but one of humanity, which makes it accessible to audiences beyond baseball. I don't think the gravity of the impact of Lefty's 1949 Goodwill Tour of Japan with the San Francisco Seals is understood by the world at large. So I felt it would be a powerful story to share as a promotional teaser for the film. It runs 9 minutes, and you are the very first audience to see it. Now, please note, and this is a huge caveat because us filmmakers get crazy about this, when we show a work in progress to people who are expecting to see a polished, finished product. And this is a work in progress. So the images and the sound are very raw, and the piece features temporary graphics, images, and music. So I'm going to run that now here. Let me get out of this and bring this back up. Zach, you can still hear me, right? Zach?
Yeah, I can hear you. I know at the last video you played, the sound appeared to be in and out a little bit. So hopefully we were good on this one.
All right, I hope so too. Okay, here we go. Let me go full screen and let's get started. Oops.
Life in Japan was really hard after the war. Cities were in rubble. It was hard to get food. Things were very expensive if you could get them.
Japan was, particularly in Tokyo, was completely destroyed by bombing.
And so there were other people, communists, coming in and saying, hey, we've got the answer. We can make your life better. And they were kind of on every corner of soapboxes. And there were other influences and people not having a lot of hope. That's where MacArthur was trying to use sports or try to find a way to improve morale and build a bridge between the Americans and the United States. But still, no matter what you do, you're an occupied nation, and there's going to be resentment there. You had sicknesses going around from the radiation from the bombs. You had orphans begging in the streets, and some of them in orphanages that maybe could handle 1/10 of the capacity of the need. And the orphans that were there weren't treated very well either. So it was a very bleak type of environment.
The occupation force had to figure out, how do we rebuild Japan? Because it was very important to rebuild Japan as an ally against communism. And one of the fellows who is on the staff of General MacArthur was a Japanese American named Kappy Harada. And he's put in charge of revitalizing Japanese baseball to build morale. And apparently at one point, there's a strategy session and MacArthur's like, okay, we need to work harder on building up Japanese morale.
I says, General, this might be something, way out of range, but I think baseball, if we have a baseball, series of goodwill baseball gameplay, that the Japanese morale will come back. They'll get closer to the GIs, the occupation. And so he said, hey, that's a heck of an idea. He said, what do you suggest? And I said, well, studying the history of Japanese baseball, I find out that a fellow named Lefty O'Doul was very popular. And he brought over like Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. And
I think when you talk about the 31 and 34 tour, when Lefty O'Doul went, he became kind of this unicorn, mythical figure, a baseball icon.
And O'Doul was the guy to do it because he was known in Japan and he was loved in Japan and he loved the country himself. So it was a perfect match to bring the San Francisco Seals on a goodwill tour in '49.
When Lefty came back in 1949, the crowds were unprecedented. They were even larger probably than in 1934. And he was amazed that he was remembered.
Yeah, there was a big reception and big parade. They made a big parade on Ginza Street.
So the story is that the San Francisco Seals arrive in Japan and they do the welcoming parade, and Lefty O'Doul stands up in the limousine and yells "Banzai," and nobody responds. And the story is that he turns to Kappy Harada and says, "Kappy, what's wrong? When I used to yell Banzai, everybody would roar Banzai back." And Kappy says, "That's why you're here, Lefty."
Some of the big moments, though, that really stand out, the first game, obviously, where Lefty addresses the Japanese for the first time in well over a decade, when he used the word "Tadaima," meaning "I am home."
the ballparks are packed, and they do all these things to build morale. One of the famous things they did was during the first game, they raised the American flag, and then they raised the Japanese flag next to it, and they played the Japanese national anthem. It was the first time in public that they had done both flags at the same time, and it brought many of the Japanese to tears.
When they played American anthem and the Japanese anthem, we felt, oh, we are equal, because we always felt we are under the occupation and we are secondary citizens. But that moment, we felt, oh, we are equal, same human being.
For the players, the people in Japan, for them to see their flag to be risen post-war at the same time with the American flag, it gave them hope.
But MacArthur was completely behind it, and he understood the optics of the situation, how important it was to show that at least symbolically the two countries were together.
Another thing that really struck the Japanese was how, in contrast to previous tours, how the Japanese themselves were treated.
And O'Doul did other things, like he brought in Japanese orphans, the war orphans, to the ballpark and gave them, of course, free tickets. But what he also did is he gave them the best seats. And that was remarked on by the Japanese press. So we even said, well, even we wouldn't have given them the best seats. We'd have, put them out in the outfield, but to treat them as special guests, that went a long way. That was both symbolic, but it showed a humanitarian mission or mutual love between the two countries.
It was these kinds of moments that transcended just sports, that built that relationship. These were human moments that really built on what American ideals are and where the Japanese could improve their lives. The 1949 tour had an impact far beyond just the results of the game. By the end of the tour, communists had kind of disappeared. The Japanese got a different picture of what America was. You have to think about 4 years before, they were mortal enemies trying to wipe each other out.
And even MacArthur, after the tour was over, said it was one of the greatest acts of diplomacy by bringing Lefty O'Doul and the San Francisco Seals.
One of the great letters that Lefty got after he got back to the United States was from a member of the Tokyo Board of Education who talked about what an impact this had on the children who were going to be the future leaders of Japan. And certainly their view would be quite different. Some of them hadn't even been born when the war started. And so their view of America was really colored by this. This is some of their first conscious memories of what America was and what it stood for, and that it could be an ally and a friend. And the humanity of, one of the things that Lefty did was make sure that any profits that came went back to Japan. He didn't take the money with him.
I want American people to understand O'Doul's contribution to world peace, not only baseball, world peace. And on that ground, he should be really inducted into the U.S. Hall of Fame.
All right, so there is your sneak preview. I hope you all enjoyed that. go back to where we were here. All right. So get here. So let me get full screen here. So one of the biggest challenges to storytellers, whether you're writing a book or making a film, is how you're going to start and end the story. Now, for once, I have that figured out. It's going to start with animation of the scene with General MacArthur's team laying out the challenges of the occupation and agreeing on O'Doul coming to Tokyo for the 49. The last scene is going to be the final at-bat of the 2023 WBC game between Japan and the USA. Now, in my opinion, this is one of baseball's greatest moments, when Ohtani struck Mike Trout out to end the game and served notice that Japan can finally be considered on equal footing with the US in terms of baseball ability. I feel that Lefty O'Doul's fingerprints are all over that moment and part of his legacy. So one of my biggest fears is that we're going to miss interviewing individuals who can share insight on Lefty. If you know of anyone along those lines, please email me at Jon, Jon, at thesweetspot.tv. The budget for this project is well into six figures, the low six figures, I might add. It's my biggest and boldest project yet. These projects are really time-consuming and expensive to make. Now, in the past, I have self-financed my films, but this is such a big project, I need help funding it. It's being crowdfunded, and we offer some great premiums featuring vintage gear from Ebbets Field Flannels, art by Arthur K. Miller, and Dennis's 2017 biography, Lefty O'Doul, Baseball's Forgotten Ambassador. You can learn how to donate on the crowdfunding link on the website, leftyodouldoc.com, and we're just $1,500 away from reaching our budget goal for phase one. So when's it going to be done? Well, I'm aiming for spring of 2024, but that delivery date is going to be driven by funding. I've got a pretty clear vision of how to make this film. And we'll need the proper funding to pay for top shelf actors, voice actors, of course, artists, rare archival film, and other creative partners. And I see the film clocking in somewhere around 45 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing here so I can get Dennis and Tom into the picture. Have we made it back home here? I think so. Okay, good. So a question, Tom, this will be a benefit to everybody. Tom is probably the only person here who's met Lefty O'Doul. So Tom, what was Lefty like as a person, and what could you expect when meeting the man?
Well, I would say he was very friendly, very outgoing, very inquisitive. If he was meeting you for the first time, he would always ask questions about where you were from, where you went to school, did you play baseball? He wanted to know more about you, the individual person. So he felt like he really knew you better and you would be his friend. Very outgoing, kind of the life of the party at times. He wanted to be in the spotlight. He was, known for being in Hollywood with some of the Hollywood people, Hollywood stars. He's a close friend of Bill Frawley's, Fred Mertz from the old Jackie Gleason show. And he was just an easy guy to talk to, and always wanted to help. Do you need anything? Do you need anything? I would say that he was just an all-around pretty good guy, regardless of whether you talked baseball with him or not. And he always asked if you needed something. So I would say he was just very friendly, outgoing. He just wanted to know more about you when he met you for the first time.
Excellent. So Dennis, a question for you. Why isn't Lefty in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown? And why is he baseball's forgotten hero?
Well, the argument has always been that he didn't have a long enough career in the major leagues. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, he started out as a pitcher and really was not successful at the major league level at all in that role, and basically sat on the bench in the major leagues for 3 years with the Yankees, and then was kind of a mop-up pitcher for the Red Sox for a year, and before going back to the Pacific Coast League when he was 27 years old and converting to the outfield. He was always a great hitter. But then the Coast League during the 1920s was one of the strongest minor leagues ever. And they kept their players. People forget that players like Mickey Cochran and Earl Averill and Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio, they were signed by Pacific Coast League teams. They were not signed by major league teams. And during the 1920s, the Pacific Coast League refused to let their players be drafted because the money just wasn't commensurate with the value of the players. And so Lefty was kind of trapped in the Coast League, hitting at a major league level, but not being in the major league. So he lost several years of his prime before the New York Giants finally purchased him when he was 31 years old. And he became a star the next year with Philadelphia and basically had 4 fantastic years as an everyday ball player. And another year or so, year and a half as a semi-regular before pretty much becoming a pinch hitter as he entered his late 30s. So he does have you have to have at least 10 seasons in the major leagues to be eligible for the Hall of Fame. He has 11, but there were only about 4.5 where he was really at the top of his game. Now, some people compare him to Dizzy Dean or Sandy Koufax, who also had 4, 5, 6 big years and otherwise didn't play much as kind of equivalents. But that's the thing that's kept Lefty out. That, and he was a big hitter at a time when offense was big at the same time, and sometimes that's devalued. But a lot of his other contributions that you're highlighting in this film generally are not considered when someone's voted for the Hall of Fame. It's simply what you did on the field, not these other contributions to baseball. And that's where I think sometimes the Hall of Fame in America comes up short. The Japanese did recognize him as a contributor and for his contributions to baseball and inducted him. But in the US, that's not the way the Hall of Fame works.
So Dennis, you mentioned that Lefty had this ungodly 4-year stretch from 29 to 32 where he hits a cumulative 371 with 2 batting titles and sets the record for the most hits in the National League with 254 in 1929, which was, of course, tied a year later by Bill Terry. But put this into context with what was happening in baseball at that time in terms of offense, and the fact that O'Doul achieved this from age 32 to 35.
Yeah, it really is remarkable that he hit the ground running when he came back to the major leagues. Even his first year with the Giants, when he was hampered somewhat by injuries, he hit, I think, 316 or 318, and then went to the Phillies, hit 398, 32 home runs, and only struck out 19 times. You're not going to see that happen again in today's game. And it was a time where offense was really exploding. Everybody was looking for the next Babe Ruth. Teams were the ball was much more lively. But what's interesting is, so his first 2 years, he hits 398 and 383 with the Phillies, then is traded to Brooklyn. The ball was changed in the National League between the 1930 and 31 season. And if you ever look at the stats, the number of home runs dropped almost in half, I think from 880 to about 480, somewhere in that range. And earned run averages dropped more than a run per game. Well, he won another batting title after the ball was changed. He hit 336 and then 368. So he kind of did it on both sides of the game. Plus, he didn't have the advantage of hitting against, arguably, although the A's this year maybe, and I apologize for bringing up the A's, but the A's may challenge them. But the Phillies had the worst pitching staff arguably in the history of the game, at least since 1900. And he didn't get to bat against them. And so he still hit 398 and 383, not being able to hit against Phillies pitching where earned run average, I think the team earned run average was nearly 7 runs per game those 2 years. Wow. And so he yes, it was a big offensive time, but he was also still at the top of the top offense of all time. So he still won 2 batting titles in 4 years. And as you said, he wasn't in his prime at that point.
Tom, what needs to happen for Lefty to be recognized for the Buck O'Neill Award? Now, the Buck O'Neill Lifetime Achievement Award is presented by the Hall of Fame's Board of Directors not more than once every 3 years to honor an individual whose extraordinary efforts enhanced baseball's positive impact on society, broadened the game's appeal, and whose character, integrity, and dignity are comparable to the qualities exhibited by O'Neill. Certainly, I think Lefty meets all of those requirements. So what's it going to take, Tom? What can we do to help?
Oh, as baseball fans, anybody can nominate someone for the Buck O'Neill Award. It's only presented every 3 years. It's due up again this year. The recipient has not been announced yet, if there's going to be a recipient. But anybody can write a letter to the Hall of Fame, to the Buck O'Neill Lifetime Achievement Award, to 25 Main Street, Cooperstown. You can write the letter at any time, but they generally will close the nominations at the end of June of the year of the award. So for this upcoming nomination is closed right now because it was last year of June. So it would be up again next year in by the end of June to write your nominations. They want letters only, no emails, no text messaging. The post office needs the business. I'm a retired letter carrier. And that's the only way they will accept the nomination to it. But anyone can write a letter of nomination stating why they feel that the individual they're nominating should be inducted or be honored with the Buck O'Neill Award.
Sounds like somebody needs to write some letters.
It's a letter writing campaign.
Excellent. Excellent. And in closing the presentation here, I just want to say that Team Lefty has received support from an eclectic group of fans and historians. Several fans have contributed to the crowdfunding, some of whom are here today, and certainly thank you for that. Doug McWilliams has been helpful, Dave Eskenazi, Tom O'Doul, Kerry Nakagawa, the Hall of Fame, Ray Saraceni, Mark McRae, Charles Mandel from Helmar Brewing, the San Francisco Giants, Dan Woodhouse, Yuriko Romer, Dave Dempsey, Dennis Snelling, of course, Tadeo Kanishi, Ebbetsfield Flannels, and Arthur K. Miller. And thank you all for allowing me to have some time to share the project with you. And I look forward to taking your questions. And I certainly hope you enjoy the clip.
Thank you, John. Well done.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for John? You could either type them in the chat or we could do a.
I did see a question from Susan Nelson about distribution plans. So I work with a distributor called Film Hub. Those are non-exclusive deals. I'm certainly open to talking to other distributors. I have reached out to KQED. I reached out to them a few years ago to co-produce the project, and they declined. But they said, "Oh, but when it's done, we want to see it. We'll think about airing it." But that's about the extent of it. And I didn't want to wait around for a distribution deal to happen before getting this thing going. So that's the status of that. And thank you for that question, Susan. Chad had asked, why do you think that Lefty got traded so much when he was, such a demon at the plate? And I think the answer is that the teams that traded him, I think they needed pitching. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Dennis, but I think he got traded a lot because the teams that traded him really needed pitching. So he got traded. Is that right, Dennis?
Well, it was a combination of his age. There was a definite bias against players in their mid-30s. New York, John McGraw didn't think he could hit left-handers, which of course he proved the next year he could, and even showed up McGraw quite a bit during that 1929 season. And the Phillies in 29 kind of surprised people. They went from one of the worst records in baseball to a 5th place finish, but then the next year they dropped right back down to the bottom. So the Phillies needed pitching. Yes, they traded in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn was on the verge of going bankrupt. And so his was really a salary dump when they sent him back to the Giants in 33. They were having trouble with the Depression. They were having trouble surviving. So they didn't want to pay his salary anymore. And they traded him and a pitcher named Waddy Clark, who had been a 20-game winner, for a backup first baseman, the guy who was backing up Bill Terry at first base. So that was really a financial thing. So I think it was his age and the circumstances. Brooklyn had thought they could be a contender, and then they weren't. And so there were different circumstances in each time, but generally I think his age worked against him a little bit, made him more expendable.
So Alec asks, did Lefty have any grudges or feuds in his major league career? Well, he never forgot a slight. Dennis mentioned earlier that, John McGraw didn't think that Lefty could hit left-handed pitching, which of course was incorrect, because if you look at his splits, he did very well against left-handers, particularly Carl Hubble. And I believe there was a series against McGraw's Giants, and he was going against Carl Hubble, and he beat him like a drum. And O'Doul was, I think, crowing in the on-deck circle saying, "I can't hit lefties." And I think he also had an axe to grind with Joe McCarthy, who was not a Lefty O'Doul fan. But when McCarthy's Cubs were fighting for the pennant at the end of the season, had to go up against Lefty and the Giants, I believe. And Lefty was pinch hitting at that time, and he hit back-to-back pinch hit home runs. And the second one effectively knocked McCarthy and his Cubs out of contention. And as he was rounding the base paths or going past McCarthy's dugout, he said to him, "There goes your goal." So he never forgot a slight. He wasn't a vindictive or a mean-spirited guy, but he never forgot a slight. And Marlene, you asked, how long is the film going to run? Probably about 45 minutes. Typically on broadcast TV, hour-long shows, they like 48 minutes so they can pack 12 minutes of commercials in. Of course, we're now in the streaming age, and so running time really doesn't mean anything. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, but that's what I'm aiming for, I think, is about 45 minutes. I'm just trying to go through the comments here to see if there are any.
Also, O'Doul did have a conflict with the owner of the Seals after his buddy kind of gave up on him, and he never got along with the new management there.
Well, you're talking about Paul Fagan, who took over.
Fagan, not his favorite person.
Right. So Charlie Graham had been the owner of the Seals for decades.
Graham had given him a lifetime contract to manage.
Right. And so when
Fagan took over,
he had some different aspirations. He wanted the PCL to be a major league operation, and he invested a lot of money to upgrade the facilities at Seals Stadium. And he was kind of a strange guy too. He got rid of one of the Seals' best players because he didn't like the way the guy wore his uniform. And so, it didn't work out. And that led to Lefty moving on from the Seals to some of the other teams he managed in the PCL in the 1950s. I think that he ended his tenure there in 51. Marlene, your hand is up.
Format will be, I don't know the right words here. You could stream it, or you could show it on a big screen in a theater. It could go either way.
The short answer is yes. I've done screenings of my films at libraries, well, certainly up at San Francisco and down here in Los Angeles too. Folks seem to have that capability now, so we'll certainly have that flexibility.
Contact at San Francisco Main Library.
Yeah,
I'm retired.
we definitely need to do an in-person screening and an event, a special event about this. He's Mr. San Francisco. I mean, it's really, really important. Those of us, my father's 99 and he worked downtown in San Francisco most of his professional career. And I would talk to him, Lefty O'Doul was huge. Everybody knew who Lefty O'Doul was. He was, you consider him sort of a big man on campus. he was loved and well respected in the business community and the baseball community and beyond.
It's kind of too bad.
Anything in the restaurant? Sorry.
It's kind of too bad it couldn't. Sorry about that. It's too bad it couldn't be shown at Lefty's old watering hole, because that building, interestingly enough, was originally built as a movie theater, and it was the first one on the West Coast that was designed exclusively to be a movie theater. And so that would be really poetic to have.
Oh, it would be. That'd be so awesome.
What I was going to ask is what's going on with that building over there? Nothing?
It's vacant. I know.
I visited
Well,
about a month
maybe
or
it
so
would've-
ago to check it out, and it's boarded up and vacant.
So there's a question from Chad here. It says, I'd like to know more about why the Stars said that he was one of the best hitting instructors of all time. You're talking about Joe DiMaggio, Dominic DiMaggio, Ted Williams, all of them saying this guy really knew hitting. And DiMaggio, when he was having a slump in a World Series, asked O'Doul, what am I doing wrong? And O'Doul gave him some advice, and it certainly helped. It worked. He had a scientific approach to hitting. He was one of the first people to use film to analyze his hitting. And he was always talking to players on the bench. What did he throw you? Or what happened when I made that out? What are you seeing out there? He constantly was analyzing. And I don't know if there were that many other active players who were students of the game and students of hitting the way that Lefty was. Kimmy.
Yes, a great program, John and Dennis and Tom. When I was in Japan last week, the Japanese people asked me, why isn't Lefty O'Doul in the Hall of Fame? Because, he's really one of the greatest Japanese ambassadors of baseball. And I thought it was very interesting that you asked that question. And I think that many of the Japanese people, they really revere Lefty O'Doul. And so hopefully, is there any chance that maybe your documentary along the line will be translated into Japanese so that the Japanese people will get a better understanding?
That is the goal of mine. My daughter is fluent in Japanese. And as a matter of fact, we're trying to reach out to Ichiro because, Lefty passed in '69. I don't think it's conceivable to say that like Shohei Ohtani knows who he is because he's from several generations removed. I would like to think that Ichiro, being a hitter, would know who he was. So I've reached out to a former teammate of his, Shigetoshi Hasagawa, and I sent him a letter in both English and Japanese to reach out to him to talk about Lefty O'Doul and to provide a connection to Ichiro. Trying to do that as a sort of a personal connection as to just going through the Mariners, whom he works for. So hopefully we'll be able to get through. And I would love to talk to Saruharu Oh. I'm sure Oh-san is very knowledgeable and aware of O'Doul. And my daughter laughed at me. I said, well, what do you think about getting an interview with Akihito, the former emperor of Japan? And she laughed. She goes, what are you, crazy? You're never going to get an interview with him. I said, well, maybe not, but at the very least, we will ask him to see if he will provide a statement, because he will certainly remember O'Doul because he was 16 and there's that famous picture of them shaking hands at the game.
I found it interesting when the Hall of Fame ballot came out and they were tallying the votes. And Costas and his cohort, whose name I forget all the time, but it was Bob Costas and another gentleman. They were mentioned each player. They went down the list of who was eligible and how many votes they had gotten. And when they got to O'Doul, Costas said, everybody thinks O'Doul's is in the Hall of Fame. Lefty O'Doul's not in the Hall of Fame. It was like a big question. And that I found that very interesting. And I get it a lot that people do think that he is already in Cooperstown and inducted as a player, because you do have Lefty Gomez, and I've had people, I think John even asked me about a field named after Lefty in Marin County. The field is in Fairfax, and it's named after Gomez, not O'Doul, because Gomez was a resident of Marin County. And that's surprising that people do think that Lefty O'Doul is already in the Hall of Fame. And it's kind of interesting to hear that a lot.
And Lefty Gomez and Lefty O'Doul were really good.
They're close.
friends.
They were good friends. Yes.
Yeah. Lefty Gomez grew up in the East Bay, and I've been in touch with his daughter, Vernona, who wrote the terrific biography of her father. She said Lefty O'Doul was the greatest guy. She really loved meeting him, and I'm hoping to interview her for the film as well. She, like so many who knew Lefty, she's getting up there in years. And of course, Lefty Gomez shot film of the 1934 tour. He was a member of that team. And so I've been talking to Lefty Gomez's grandson about using that footage in the film, along with Con Dempsey, his son, Dave Dempsey. I'm talking to Dave about using the 8mm film that his dad, Con, who was a pitcher for the Seals, shot during the 1949 tour. I know Yuriko is going to be using it in her Diamond Diplomacy film. And Yuriko is a wonderful colleague and a good friend. And she and I have been sort of talking about our dueling projects to make sure we don't step on each other's feet. You know, so I think that's really cool that two guys from the Bay Area ended up having amazing baseball careers, and their first name was Lefty. And of course, they're both left-handed.
It was Vernon Gomez.
That's right. El Gufo.
John, you bring up Con Dempsey, and that reminds me of some stories that he told at the 1989 Pacific Coast League reunion. It was the focus of the 1999 Pacific Coast League reunion in Oakland was the 1949 tour. So they had Con Dempsey, Jim Westlake,
Jim Moran,
Dario Lodicani. I can't recall, but I think there was one other person.
Jim Moran.
But yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, I think it was Jim Moran. I have very choppy audio of it, but I would imagine there's some stuff out there on that too. There's some like Con Dempsey has some great stories.
Oh yeah,
of that too. Yeah.
Nice family, great people.
Yeah.
And Zach, you had mentioned we're talking about hitting instructors. Lefty O'Doul was the official hitting instructor for Gary Cooper for The Pride of the Yankees, the classic film about Lou Gehrig. And Cooper was a right-handed hitter, and I don't think he was much of a ball player either. But O'Doul, you know, I wouldn't say took him to task, but he was pretty strong in terms of, you know, getting him to bat, teaching him to bat left-handed, to where he was somewhat passable in the film. And Cooper said, you know, he was a tremendous hitting instructor. He was really impressed with him, and he said his hands were raw by the time Lefty was done with him.
That's one of the photos I remember. I brought that up because it's one of the photos I remember at the entry of the old Gary Street location from even the 90s. I want to say it was Gary Cooper and Lefty O'Doul chopping a stump or something like that, practicing for Pride of the Yankees. It's a really interesting old photo.
That's a cool photo. I hope we get our hands on that one.
Yeah.
O'Doul got credit in the film too. Do you know what the credit was?
No,
I don't.
Anybody? A little trivia question. There's a cop in a scene in Cooper's out. It's Lou Gehrig in the middle of the night visiting his future wife, and a cop comes up and says, "Oh, Mr. Gehrig, my name is O'Doul," and that was some of the credit that he got.
So Ben asks, how many of you have this book?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yakyu, U.S. Tours of Japan, Volume 1, 1907 to 1958, edited by Robert Fitz, Bill Nolan, and James Four, associate editors, Len Levin. So I have it. I've downloaded it.
Okay.
we're all SABR members here, and
you
it's
can get
free
it. I
download.
had someone send it to me. That's why I wanted to ask. And sorry, I joined late, guys. I had another call.
No worries.
And I just wanted to listen to your presentation, and I was trying to make some connections with how Lefty was involved. Because I had that book, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I definitely have it, but I still have to read it.
Yeah, I know. Same.
But it's great that it's out there. Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah, no problem.
And there's actually a little
Rob
bit more
and
information.
John,
Well,
are you going to talk about
one of
SABR Day?
our couple of meetings ago. Yeah.
Wait,
Here. Charles, let's
We
go.
had
ahead.
John
Charles.
and Rob, featured John and Rob. So there's
Yeah.
a video of that, of Rob's discussion of that book on the SABR website.
Oh, cool.
Wait, I had a question for John. My question was, because you talked about getting Sadaharo, any chance of talking to Masanori Murakami?
Well, probably not, for two reasons. There was not a big connection for Lefty getting Mashi to come to the U.S. You would have thought there would. I'm sure there was, somewhat tangentially.
Cappy Harada.
Yeah, that's right. And the other piece is I interviewed him a few years ago when he was coming around doing his book tour for the Mashi book, and there was a sort of a paperwork snafu. You know, whenever you sit anyone down for one of these interviews that we do, everybody has to sign a release form, and there was a little bit of reluctance on his part, because part of the reason he left the Giants was this big paperwork contract snafu. And so, I mean, all at once it was sort of bringing back all these bad memories, and so, you know, kind of called timeout on it. So doubtful, plus he's in Japan. Now, you know, if we end up going to Japan to interview Osan, maybe it's a possibility. But of course, I'm a big Mashi fan, and I love Rob.
I remember the event at the Maine Public Library. So, which was a lot of fun, which was why I was wondering if he was going to be in your movie.
Yeah, he will be. He will be, because the very first game in which he pitches is against the Mets at Shea Stadium. And the game is on television, and Lefty O'Doul has it on in his restaurant and bar. And he is beaming like a father, you know, with his first son. And there are tears coming down his face, because he says, I've been waiting for this moment for decades and decades. So that moment will most likely be in the film for sure.
Awesome.
And for those of you who
John,
don't like the Dodgers, don't forget that Mashi was a Dodger killer. They didn't want to see Mashi out there. He had, you know, he had that great screwball, and he tied the Dodgers up in knots with that thing.
You know, John, I know you're going to address this in the film as well, but I think one of the things that's really fascinating about Lefty is there's so many facets to him, and we haven't even touched a lot of them, such as his kids' days in San Francisco and his work with youth baseball programs, his championing of various female athletes over his lifetime, and his work recognizing those who were down and out. And, you know, he opened his restaurant up for those folks at Thanksgiving and Christmas and gave free meals. And certainly there was a foundation that continued on after doing a lot of that work. And he was just a fascinating all-around individual who's hard to encapsulate in one thing. There were so many sides to him. And so I know you're going to touch on those things, but I think everybody here should recognize that, like you said, it's what makes him a forgotten hero, what kind of person he was. You know, there's a famous story of I think I talked to a reporter who said he happened to see Lefty helping out a guy who was in trouble all the time. And he said, "Why are you bailing him out again? He's always in trouble." He says, "Well, I see a guy who needs help. I'm going to help him." And that was kind of his attitude. He wasn't really judgmental in that way. Even though there were certain people he would have gripes with and you know, have rivalries with, but at the same time, and these were things that other people didn't necessarily see. Like this reporter just happened to see this happen, and Lefty did those things all the time. So just want to make sure everybody understands there's a lot of facets to Lefty that are really fascinating.
It's what makes him such a great story. I worked for the Disney company for many years, and one of the things I learned from them, if you're going to put out a book or you're going to make a movie about something, it had better be pretty unique and something that nobody really has done before. And Lefty's story sort of meets those requirements. Years ago, I made a documentary about the great sports writer. I shouldn't call him sports writer, the great just writer, Arnold Haino, who lived to be 99. And I made the film with him started the film with him when he was 93. And he said, "You've got a big problem. I've lived too long and I've done too much." So, and that was a challenge, but I think that film was a really good experience for this project, because even though Lefty didn't live as long and he's not alive now for me to talk to, is a multi-layered individual who lived 3 lifetimes in those 69 years.
Very good. All right. All right. Well, we are a little bit after the hour, and I think that those comments from Dennis and Jon were a great, inspiring way to end it, as far as mentioning what encapsulates Lefty O'Doul, not just as a ball player, but as a man, a great man that hopefully we get to see inducted into the Hall of Fame one of these days. So within the next day or so, I noticed there were some people joining a little bit late. And then also, if you have any friends that are interested in this topic, within the next day or so, this will be posted on YouTube. If you type in any kind of keyword search that you can think of related to Lefty O'Doul, SABR, Dusty Baker chapter, Bay Area chapter, whatnot, I'll make sure that comes up. So that will be available, and we look forward to maybe sometime in the early in the coming year to get another update on this great project. Do you have a last announcement, Marlene? I see your hand just raised.
Yes, would you remind us where the crowdfunding, we can find that crowdfunding link? That's on the website?
Yeah, it's on the website, leftyodouldoc.com.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're excited for you, Jon. This is great. And
thank you.
And then Jon has his contact information in the chat right now.
And thank you, everyone, for your kind attention, especially Zach and Marlene and Steve, for allowing me to share about the project.
You're always a pleasure to have, Jon. Thank you very much. All right, everybody, have a great night. Until next time. Thanks again.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks a bunch. Great.